In the spring of the 13th century, two armies faced one another on the plains of Kirina. One was commanded by a king whose name had become synonymous with fear. His rivals called him unstoppable. The griots would later say he commanded spirits, that no ordinary weapon could touch him. That entire kingdom surrendered before a battle had even begun. His name was Soumaoro Kanté. Facing him was a man who, only a few years earlier, possessed no kingdom, no throne, and, according to the oldest traditions, had once been unable to walk. His name was Sundiata Keita. What happened that day would change the history of West Africa. The mighty Soso kingdom would fall, the Mali Empire would rise, and the story of one unlikely prince would survive. Not in royal chronicles carved into stone, nor in dusty libraries, but in the memories of generations of griots who carried his story across the savannas of West Africa for more than 8 centuries. History rarely gives us perfect certainty. It gives us fragments, memories, songs, and legends. Some are embellished, some are symbolic. Yet together, they tell the story of a man whose legacy reshaped an entire continent. This is the story of Sundiata Keita. Every empire appears permanent until it isn't. For nearly 400 years, the Ghana Empire dominated the Western Sahel. Despite its name, it was not located within the borders of modern Ghana. Instead, it flourished farther northwest, controlling one of the most valuable trade networks on Earth. From the forests to the south came gold, from the Sahara came salt. To us, salt may seem ordinary, but in the Middle Ages it preserved food, sustained caravans crossing vast deserts, and could be worth almost as much as gold itself. Whoever controlled that trade controlled extraordinary wealth, but no empire lasts forever. By the early 13th century, Ghana's influence had faded. Historians point to several causes: shifting trade routes, internal political struggles, environmental pressures, and conflicts with neighboring powers. Whatever the exact balance of those forces, the result was unmistakable. Its authority fractured. Across the western savannah, ambitious rulers carved out their own territories. Old alliances dissolved, new rivalries emerged. Merchants still crossed the Sahara, but they now passed through a landscape divided among competing kingdoms, each eager to control the wealth flowing through its lands. It was an age of opportunity and uncertainty. Far to the south, near the upper reaches of the Niger River, lay the small Mandinka kingdom of Niani. It was not the richest kingdom, nor the most powerful. To many travelers, it would have appeared little different from dozens of other settlements scattered across the region. Yet, history has an uncanny habit of choosing unlikely places. If the griots are to be believed, the story of Sundiata Keita began long before he was born. One day, 2 hunters arrived at the court of King Magan Konfata. They were not simply hunters, they were also regarded as men who understood signs, omens, and the hidden rhythms of the world. Their message was extraordinary. The king, they declared, would father a son destined to become one of the greatest rulers in history. But there was a condition. The child's mother would not be found among the noble families of the region. She would be unexpected. According to the Epic of Sundiata, that woman was Sogolon Konde. The griots describe her as physically unremarkable. Some versions even call her unattractive and associate her with the spirit of a powerful buffalo. Whether these descriptions were meant literally or symbolically is impossible to know today. What they almost certainly reveal is that greatness in the Mandinka imagination often emerged from places where few people thought to look. King Magan accepted the prophecy. He married Sogolon, and sometime around the beginning of the 13th century, their son was born. He was named Sundiata. If the prophecy promised greatness, his childhood seemed determined to contradict it. According to the oral tradition, Sundiata did not crawl. He did not stand. Year after year, he remained unable to walk. Modern historians cannot determine whether he suffered from a medical condition, a developmental disorder, or whether this part of the story became symbolic over centuries of retelling. What matters is this. Everyone around him believed he was weak, and in the world he was born into, that mattered. The Western Sahel was not governed by elections or written constitutions. A ruler was expected to lead armies, to hunt, to ride horseback, to inspire confidence simply by entering a room. A prince who could not even stand appeared destined never to rule. The doubts did not remain whispers. After King Magan's death, the royal court divided. His first wife, Sasuma Berete, wanted her own son, Dankaran Tuman, to inherit the throne. From her perspective, the argument was almost impossible to challenge. One prince was healthy. The other, according to every appearance, would never lead warriors into battle. Politics has rarely been kind to uncertainty. Sasuma's faction gained the upper hand, and Dankaran was recognized as ruler. For Sundiata and his mother, life inside the royal court became increasingly difficult. The epic describes years of humiliation, insults, isolation, even the denial of food from the royal gardens. One day, after seeing his mother publicly humiliated, Sundiata asked for an iron rod. Not a walking stick, an iron rod. The court reportedly laughed. They expected another failure. Instead, the boy planted the rod into the ground. He pushed. The iron bent beneath the strain, and for the first time in his life, Sundiata stood. Whether this happened exactly as the griots describe is something historians cannot answer. Some see the scene as literal history. Others believe it became a powerful symbol of resilience over generations of storytelling. Either way, its meaning has never been in doubt. The child everyone underestimated had risen, and from that moment forward, the prophecy no longer sounded impossible. It sounded inevitable, but standing was only the beginning. Before Sundiata could become a king, he would first lose everything. History has a habit of testing people, just as they begin to believe their fortunes have changed. Standing for the first time did not make Sundiata king. If anything, it made him dangerous. According to the oral tradition, the balance of power inside the royal court shifted almost overnight. The boy, once dismissed as harmless, had suddenly become a legitimate rival to the throne. For his supporters, the ancient prophecy seemed to be unfolding. For his enemies, it was becoming a threat. Whether through fear, political calculation, or simple survival, one reality became impossible to ignore. Sundiata and his family could no longer remain in Niani, so they left. Not as conquerors, not even as honored guests. They left as exiles. Imagine the journey. Hundreds of kilometers stretched before them, open savanna, scattered forests, rivers swollen by seasonal rains, and roads traveled by merchants, hunters, diplomats, and soldiers. This was no empty wilderness. It was a world connected by trade routes that carried gold north across the Sahara and returned with salt, horses, fine cloth, and ideas from distant lands. For years, Sundiata wandered through that world. The epic tells us he and his family found refuge in several kingdoms before finally arriving in Myanmar, a prosperous Mandinka state to the northeast. Here, the story changes. The frightened prince disappears. The future ruler begins to emerge. Unlike Niani, where Sundiata's disability had defined him, Myanmar offered something far more valuable than sympathy. It offered opportunity. The king of Myanmar recognized something remarkable in the young exile. Not simply physical strength, but judgment, patience, a quiet confidence that seemed unusual for someone who had lost everything. Sundiata gradually earned the king's trust. He trained with soldiers, he learned the discipline of cavalry warfare, he observed how taxes were collected, how disputes between nobles were settled, how alliances were maintained, and, perhaps most importantly, how kingdoms survived. This was an education no palace tutor could have provided. Every court he visited governed differently. Every ruler solved problems differently. Some ruled through fear, others through loyalty. Sundiata watched, he listened, he remembered. The griots often celebrate his growing physical strength during these years. Historians, however, point to something even more significant. By the time Sundiata reached adulthood, he possessed something few princes ever acquired, the rare privilege of seeing multiple kingdoms from the outside. He understood not only how power was gained, but why it was so easily lost. Years passed. Back in his homeland, the situation grew steadily worse. The kingdom Sundiata had left behind was weakening. Its leaders quarreled, its allies drifted away, and beyond its borders, another power was rising. A ruler whose reputation spread across the western savannah like an approaching storm. His name was Soumaoro Kanté, and soon every kingdom in the region would know it. Long before armies met on the plains of Kirina, they met in people's imaginations. Fear travels faster than soldiers, and few rulers inspired more fear than Soumaoro Kanté. Historically, Soumaoro was the king of the Soso kingdom, a rising power that emerged after the decline of the Ghana Empire, but history alone does not explain his reputation. For that, we turn to the griots. According to the Epic of Sundiata, Soumaoro was more than a king. He was a master of hidden knowledge, a ruler who consulted powerful spirits. Kingdoms surrendered before him, one by one. The Mandinka states fell under Soso domination. Chiefs who resisted were defeated. Those who submitted were forced to pay tribute. Trade routes became increasingly controlled by Soso authority. The balance of power in West Africa was changing once again. Back in Niani, the kingdom Sundiata had left behind was collapsing. His half-brother Dankarantuman struggled to unite the Mandinka against the growing threat. When Soumaoro advanced, resistance quickly crumbled. According to both the oral traditions and later historical accounts, Dankaran abandoned the kingdom and fled. The throne he had fought so hard to claim could no longer protect him. The Mandinka people found themselves without a leader, and in moments like these, memory becomes powerful. Across villages and royal courts, people began remembering the prince who had once been driven into exile, the boy who had stood when everyone believed he never could. Delegations were assembled, messengers crossed forests, rivers, and open savanna. Their destination was Mima. When they finally found Sundiata, their request was simple: come home. The kingdom needs you. It is tempting to imagine that Sundiata accepted immediately. The triumphant hero, the destined king, the man racing home to reclaim his birthright. History suggests something rather different. He hesitated. By now, Sundiata had built a respected life in Mema. He had earned the confidence of its king. He commanded warriors. He enjoyed security. Returning home meant risking everything. If he failed, he would lose not only his own life, but the lives of everyone who chose to follow him. Great leaders are often remembered for their courage, less often for their caution. Sundiata understood that bravery alone does not win wars. Preparation does. So before raising an army, he built something even more important: trust. He visited neighboring rulers. He renewed old friendships. He persuaded former rivals that divided kingdoms would fall one after another if Soumaoro remained unchallenged. This was no longer a struggle for one throne. It had become a fight for the future of the Mandinka people, one by one. Alliances formed. Warriors arrived carrying spears of hardened iron. Expert archers answered the call. Horsemen rode in from allied kingdoms. Veteran commanders from Mema joined the growing coalition. Each force was different. Different customs, different leaders, different ambitions. Holding them together would require more than strength. It would require belief. For the first time in years, the Mandinka were united, not under fear but under hope. Ahead lay the plains of Kirina. Ahead waited Soumaoro Kanté and the battle that would decide the future of West Africa. There is an old saying, wars are won long before the first sword is drawn. By the time Sundiata's coalition reached Kirina, months, perhaps years, of preparation had already taken place. Messengers had crossed kingdoms. Old rivalries had been set aside. Separate armies had agreed to fight under a single banner. That alone was remarkable. Victory would require something even greater. Across the plain stood the army of Soumaoro Kanté. His warriors were experienced, disciplined. Many had spent years expanding the influence of the Soso kingdom across the western Sahel. To those who followed him, Soumaoro appeared almost untouchable. According to the griots, his power extended beyond military strength. They sang that no ordinary weapon could defeat him, that protective spirits watched over him, that his enemies lost courage before battle had even begun. Whether these stories reflected genuine belief, political propaganda, or centuries of poetic embellishment, they reveal an undeniable truth. Soumaoro had become larger than life, and sometimes an army fights an idea as much as it fights an enemy. The exact course of the Battle of Kirina has been lost to history. No contemporary battlefield reports survive. No commanders left detailed accounts. What remains are the memories preserved by generations of griots and the broad conclusions accepted by historians. Sundiata's coalition defeated the Soso army. The victory was decisive. The epic remembers one extraordinary moment. According to the tradition, Sundiata learned that Soumaoro's supernatural protection could be broken by an arrow tipped with the spur of a white rooster. When the arrow struck, Soumaoro's confidence collapsed. He turned his horse and he fled the battlefield. The man believed to be invincible had retreated. For soldiers who had followed Soumaoro out of fear, that single moment changed everything. Military history has shown again and again that battles are often decided not when armies are destroyed, but when belief is. The Soso lines broke. Warriors who had marched forward together now scattered in every direction. The coalition advanced. By sunset, the balance of power in West Africa had changed forever. The victory at Kirina was not simply the triumph of one prince reclaiming his homeland. It marked the birth of something entirely new. A kingdom united not by conquest alone, but by cooperation. Sundiata had every opportunity to rule, as so many conquerors before him had ruled. He could have demanded revenge, executed defeated rivals, ruled through fear. History suggests he chose a different path. Many former enemies were allowed to enter the new political order. Local rulers retained authority within their own lands, provided they recognized the leadership of the new empire. Trade resumed. Communities devastated by years of conflict began rebuilding. Sundiata understood something that many conquerors never did. Winning a battle is not the same as winning a peace. The empire that emerged after Kirina would become one of the greatest powers medieval Africa had ever known. But its greatest achievement was not the battle itself. It was what came after, and that is often the harder victory. History is not always preserved in books. Sometimes it survives in memory. No contemporary biography of Sundiata Keita has ever been found. No personal letters, no royal diary, no monument built by his own hand. Instead, his life was carried across centuries by voices, by the Jelly-W, better known in the West as griots. They were more than musicians, more than storytellers. They were historians, genealogists, advisors, guardians of memory. For more than 800 years, they recited the story of the boy who became a king, adapting it for new audiences while preserving its heart. That is why the story reaches us today with both history and legend woven together. Historians continue to debate many details of Sundiata's life. The exact year of his birth, the extent of his empire, the precise events at Kirina. Even the famous Kurukan Fuga survives through traditions recorded centuries after the events it describes. These questions matter. They help us better understand the past, but they do not erase what history makes unmistakably clear. A ruler named Sundiata transformed the political landscape of West Africa. The empire he founded became one of the greatest powers of the medieval world. Its wealth reached North Africa, the Mediterranean, and eventually Europe. Its cities became centers of trade, diplomacy, and learning. Its foundations supported generations of rulers, including the man history remembers as Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca would make the name of Mali known across continents. Yet perhaps Sundiata's greatest achievement cannot be measured in territory, or gold, or military victories. It is measured in endurance. 8 centuries have passed, empires have risen and disappeared. Capitals have crumbled, trade routes have shifted, dynasties have vanished. Yet somewhere in West Africa, a griot still sings his name. Perhaps that is the greatest victory any ruler can hope for, not to be feared, not to be obeyed, but to be remembered. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life and legacy of Sundiata Keita. If you enjoyed this documentary and would like to see more carefully researched stories from African history and beyond, consider subscribing to Crowns and Iron. Until next time, remember this: history does not belong only to those who wrote it down. It also belongs to those who refused to let it be forgotten.